Hi, I'm Ali Seegar and today I'm at the City Bibliothèque and I'm going to read a little bit from book 1 of the Tommy Turner Tremendous Travels series. This is the book 1. I thought that I would start with the first chapter just to give you a little bit of information about who Tommy is. So this is chapter 1 in which we meet Tommy. "Fazang!" cried Tommy as he leapt onto his bike and sped off down the driveway of his new home in Parsons Court. A tingle of excitement bubbled inside him, like a fizzy drink about to explode. It ran down his arms and legs and buzzed about his head as he gathered speed at the bottom of the drive. It made his skin tingle and his heart pound, and all of a sudden the sky looked bluer than it had for many weeks. On the very last afternoon of the summer holiday, Tommy could remember what it was like to feel happy. He had not felt this way for at least 7 weeks. In fact, he had felt miserable. Just like the time he had accidentally spilt orange squash all over his dad's brand new laptop and found himself grounded for 3 weeks without any pocket money. In fact, Tommy had felt miserable ever since his parents had sat him down and told him they were moving house, away from his friends, his school, and the life he had known for the whole of his 12.5 years. These days he used words he heard his dad say when he accidentally hit his thumb with a hammer or reversed his car into the dustbin. Tommy had got to quite like using them. They made him feel a whole lot better. Just like the word he'd said to himself when his parents had told him about his new school. They'd been in the middle of eating his favourite supper of bangers and mash, and Tommy had just stuck a huge forkful of buttery potato into his mouth when his mum leant forward and grinned at him. It was a strange, unnatural grin, the sort of grin you might expect to see on a politician, and a chill trickled down his back. There was only one thing it could mean: trouble. Normally his mum only smiled at really important people like the bank manager or his dad's boss and his 6-year younger sister Sally. "Tommy, darling," said his mum, a little bit too brightly. This worried him even more. She never said darling to him. She paused for a moment and then gave a bright laugh. Tommy gulped down his mash in anticipation. "Tommy, we have the most exciting news to tell you, haven't we, Gordon?" She nudged Tommy's dad, who appeared from behind the newspaper he was absorbed in. He said, spearing a large piece of sausage onto his fork before returning to his reading. "You tell him. You're better at it than me." "Oh, Tommy," trilled his mum, as she cut up some dainty pieces of sausage to feed Sally. "You'll never guess in a million years, so I'll tell you straight out. We, your father and I that is, have found you the most amazing new school. Hi Brooms." "Hi Brooms." She repeated the name slowly for added effect. "The very best boarding school in the—" "Boarding school!" exclaimed Tommy. This was when he muttered the word to himself. Yes, but you, my darling, will be one of the day boys." His mum shoved the piece of sausage into Sally's mouth, which was beaming from ear to ear at the look of horror etched on Tommy's face. Nothing delighted her more than to see her brother looking miserable. "But what about me staying at Forrester? What about Digby and the gang? What about the football team?" A queasy gurgle galloped around Tommy's stomach. He pushed his food away, too anxious to eat another mouthful. "I was going to be made captain this year," he said quietly. Well, there's a slight problem there," his dad replied briskly, folding up his paper and clearing his throat. "Go on, Prunilla, don't keep the boy waiting." Tommy glanced at his dad's fat rosy face and then back at his mum's brightly colour one. They both beamed at him as though he'd just won the lottery. "What problem?" he gulped, fighting back the lump that was welling in his throat. "Well, Tommy, the house we've bought is rather—" "House!" cried Tommy. "Don't yell, Tommy dear. High Brooms boys certainly do not yell. Now, where were we? Yes, the matter of the fact is, the house is rather far from here, and it'll be difficult to travel the distance. But I'm sure you'll make lots of friends, and the right sort of friends at that. Some of the parents of High Brooms are terribly important diplomats. Just think of the parties you'll be invited to. It'll be simply marvellous, won't it, Gordon?" His dad nodded his agreement and rubbed his podgy hands together. Tommy felt as though a boa constrictor had suddenly shot up his chair leg and wrapped itself around his ribs. The mash he had swallowed was threatening to show itself again. But the only thing he said was, "What about Digby?" Digby was his best friend and fellow adventurer. They had met on the very first day of primary school and remained best friends for their 8 last years. There was nothing Tommy had done without Digby as his sidekick, and they'd stood side by side between each other through thick and thin all the years they'd known each other. It looked as though all this would now end. "Tommy can come and stay with you at half term," said his mother. "Now, no more whatabouts. Your father has been given a wonderful opportunity, and we're moving in 4 weeks' time, whether you like it or not." High Brooms was a large Victorian red brick building full of long winding corridors and towering ceilings. The present headmaster, Mr. Hargreaves, had himself been a pupil there many years ago. Now that he ruled over the school, expulsion was his favourite word, and he did not hesitate to use it. Tommy looked through the car window with a pang of longing. If only Digby were here with him. If only he had some friends to laugh with. But how could it be possible if no one would even speak to him? The teachers were also against him, so it seemed. Mr. Jenkins, their form teacher, was forever sneaking up behind him and threatening to whack him with his ruler. But Tommy could not help it if he was a daydreamer. He did not mean to think about other things. It just happened without him realising. The other day he'd been sitting in maths, staring out of the classroom window, while Mr. Phillips droned on and on about multiplication. It was not that Tommy hated maths, he just found it boring. Outside, in the far distance, he could see Year 10 playing football, Mr. Adams blowing the whistle and one of the boys rolling on the ground, clutching his knee. Turner! Goal! He imagined himself there at Wembley, the final minute of the FA Cup. Crowds cheering as the magical foot of Tommy Turner saved the match. He would be lifted high by his teammates and carried around the pitch. Man of the match, cameras flashing, reporters clamouring to get the best interview. And Tommy, the hero, he would be made captain, invited to play in the World Cup. England would be saved. And what do you think the answer is, Turner? Tommy looked in panic at Mr. Phillips, who was staring meanly at him. Now everyone in the class was staring at him. Why was his brain filling with mush instead of answers? "I'm not sure, sir," he muttered, feeling his ears turn red hot. "Well, what do you think the question is?" said Mr. Phillips with growing impatience. "I'm not sure, sir," Tommy said even more quietly. The room was as still as a morgue, the buzz of the overhead lights breaking the heavy silence. "Not sure, eh? Well, what are you sure of, Turner?" snarled Mr. Phillips. The other boys sniggered. Oh, don't bother answering. It clearly isn't worth teaching you anything, but I will deal with you after class. Now, who does know the answer?" Several hands shot up as Mr. Phillips continued the lesson. "Nice one, Turner," whispered Simon Gillett, leaning over his desk. "You've really got it coming." And he had. First, Mr. Phillips had given him a lecture about laziness, and then a punishment. I shall pay attention in class and correctly answer the questions written out 200 times to be completed and handed in by the following morning. Landing confirmed for 1600 hours. Over. The voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Silence. Do you copy? Over. Tommy woke with a start, disorientated by the voice. His room was pitch black and weird, whirring noises were coming from the end of his bed. Dad, he whispered, is that you? Turner, do you copy? Over, said the voice, louder now with a hint of frustration. Tommy fumbled for the light switch, which was not in its usual place, found it and clicked it on. The sudden light dazzled him, dancing before his eyes in a multitude of colours. Blinking back watery tears, he tried to shake the fuzziness out of his head, but the colours kept on dancing. Eventually, his sleepy eyes focused, and letting out an enormous gasp, he stared in shock at what they saw. Ahead of him, with hundreds of flashing lights and buttons, was a huge metallic cockpit, stretching far out to either side of him. Above the instrument panel, a large dial rotated at high speed, its numbers rapidly descending. Tommy was sitting in a red leather swivel chair that was felt as though it had been moulded against his body. A tightly buckled belt held him firmly secured. The whirring noise came from a giant screen above the cockpit that was expanding inch by inch, revealing a picture of many millions of gleaming stars. On the right side of the screen, a huge red ball was appearing, orange mists swirling and whirling, twisting and turning around it. It was getting nearer and nearer every second. Tommy could not believe how vivid his dream felt. Every sound buzzed like electricity. Every colour sparkled as bright as a jewel. But how on earth was he going to fly a spaceship when no one else was there to help him, even if it was a dream? Before he could take a calming breath, a black button on the left of his chair started to blink. Turner, are you there? Do you copy? Over. Tommy looked in panic. Everything was happening far too quickly. The black button stopped flashing, so without thinking he pressed it and spoke into a large microphone mounted in front of him. Yes, Turner here. His voice trembled with terror and excitement. What's going on? Over. Going on? What do you mean, going on? You're landing in 10 minutes. Where's the rest of the crew? Where's Peters? At that moment, a door banged behind him. Spinning around, he saw an enormous man come striding into the room. The man was dressed from head to toe in a silver suit and was carrying a child's beaker full of tea. What's going on, Turner? He asked sleepily. What's the face for? Tommy, realising his mouth was hanging wide open in a silent scream, stammered, I think we're meant to be landing in 10 minutes, apparently. 10 minutes? Yelled the immense man. Why didn't you wake me? Tommy could think quite clearly why he had not woken him. It was because he was asleep himself, at this very minute, halfway through an utterly strange but entirely realistic dream. But he did not think he should say that right now. Never mind, reprisals later, continued the man. Why isn't ground control in contact yet? The black button started blinking again and the voice bellowed, This is ground control. What's going on there, Peters? Over? Yeah, Peters here, said the enormous man, grabbing hold of the microphone. No probs, everything's cool. Without warning, the spaceship reeled to the right, hurtling downwards like a massive chunk of rock. Peters, shooting round to the other side of Tommy, jumped into another red chair, grabbed a big metal stick in front of him and swung it to the left. Brake, Turner, he shouted. We're coming in too fast. Tommy scanned the array of knobs, unable to distinguish one from the other, his fingers running from one button to the next. On the screen, the big red ball looked gigantic, looming ever closer. The ship lurched again, then plunged into the cloud of orange smoke he had seen wafting around the ball. We've hit the atmosphere, yelled Peters. Where's the brake? The green lever. Pull it now! Peters smashed his hand onto a massive blue button as Tommy wrenched the green lever with all his might, and a loud siren rang out around the room. The ship reeled to one side and righted itself, slowing swiftly to a normal speed. The dial he had spotted earlier showed the figure 4.57.43. "Less than 5 minutes to go," said Peters. "Where's the rest of the crew?" "Here, Skipper," replied a voice behind him, and 5 more people came rushing into the room. "Sorry we're late," said another, strapping himself onto one of the seats at the back of the room. "We were feeding the Anjulongs, and you know how long that takes." 4 minutes and counting," said Peters. Tommy felt a sudden surge of adrenaline rushing through his body. Where am I going, he wondered. And more to the point, what or who are the Anjulongs that took so long to feed? Peters had by now taken control of the landing, and his only instruction to Tommy was to keep an eye on the braking system, which thankfully Tommy now knew where to find. The orange haze that had temporarily concealed the landing pad was waning into wispy strands. Up ahead, Tommy could vaguely make out some lights flashing repetitively, like a line of lighthouses leading the way to safety. 2 minutes and counting, said Peters. Everything's under control, thought Tommy, relaxing into his chair. It's quite fun, this spaceship stuff. Easy peasy when you know what button to press. Just then, a huge silver object flashed past the window. It looked like an enormous undulating balloon, changing shape before his very eyes. Round, then oval, concave, then round again. It doubled back on itself and charged towards the ship. Then came another from the opposite side, and another, this one gold in colour. The first button struck the right side. Bam! Then on the left, now on the roof. Ship shuddering, lights flickering, Tommy's heart thumping and pounding. What was attacking them so near their destination? Landing discs attached, stated Peters. Hit the brakes, Turner. 30 seconds and counting. Tommy, letting out a sigh of relief, yanked the green lever again, and the ship ground to a halt, floating high up in the sky and suspended by the 3 landing discs. Slowly, steadily, the ship descended, finally reaching the ground and safety. Good landing, folks, said Peters. Now, we have 90 minutes decompression time before entering Untitled, so I suggest you all retire to your bunks and get some shut-eye. He turned to Tommy, smiling. Congrats, Turner. First mission completed. Now all we need to do is deliver the Anjulongs and we're out of here. The Anjulongs were positioned in various parts of the room and seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the generous hospitality being shown to them. 2 were busy playing cards at a side table. Another was sitting with his feet up, drinking a beer and watching TV, while the largest of the group was reclining on a chaise lounge, smoking a cigar as he dictated a letter to the final member of the party, who was sitting at his feet taking notes. They were quite simply the strangest bunch of aliens Tommy had ever seen. Not that he'd actually seen any in real life before. They were bright blue and each had 3 long giraffe necks, on each of which sat a head. On the centre neck was a huge round head that sported a pair of large round eyes, while on the top of the right-hand neck was a smaller head and mouth. Their jumbo-sized ears almost concealed the tiny head on the last remaining neck. They also had no nose, which could explain why they did not seem to mind the smell that arose from them. They were dressed in safari kit, which Baxter later explained to Tommy was their Earth ceremonial visiting gear. And the reason feeding time had taken so long earlier was explained by the size of their vast extended stomachs, which stuck out over the top of their shorts like camels' humps. They were without doubt very, very ugly. As Tommy and the others entered the room, the Anjulong, who had been taking notes, leapt to his feet and headed towards them, his neck wobbling with each heavy step. That's the official translator, whispered Baxter to Tommy. The others are his personal guards. The ambassador is anxious to disembark this vessel as soon as is feasible, he said in flawless English, his voice sounding like a 1950s newsreader. He has another engagement to grace with his presence prior to the gala tonight. As he finished speaking, the large Anjulong rose from his chaise lounge and, after puffing a huge smoke ring from his cigar, announced, "Are you talking now? Are you speaking the English good, yeah?" "Ambassador," gushed the translator proudly. "What a joyous occasion to heed such flawless pronunciation." "Silence," ordered the ambassador. The Anjulong flinched at the rebuff and hung his head dejectedly. Peter stepped forward and held his hand out to the ambassador. "Welcome back to Untitled, sir. We're now ready to leave the craft and transportation is waiting outside. If you will all follow me, we can go without further ado." The ambassador snapped his large blue fingers and the other Anjulongs leapt to their feet, rushing over to form a tight ring around him. What a sight it was, all their heads and stomachs sticking out in different directions. Another finger snap and Peter set off, leading the way through the ship. The Anjulongs shuffled along behind him, steadfast in their formation, clunking and wobbling their way until they reached the lift. With a bit of jostling, everyone crammed in and the doors slid smoothly together. The Anjulong's stench in the visitors' quarters had been pretty unbearable, but in this confined space it was truly disgusting. It smelt like someone had shovelled a stackful of revoltingly rancid, dreadfully decomposing elephant dung into the lift, mixed in a few dead rats for good measure, and let the concoction mature for 6 months like a vintage cheese. Now it was at its ripest point, and it seemed like they were trapped inside the slowest, deepest lift in the entire solar system. Tommy felt if he had to hold his breath much longer that his lungs would explode and he would end his days as a sticky mess all over the lift. But at last the lift clunked to the ground floor. The doors opened and out they all burst, Tommy and the other astronauts gulping in that much needed air. Then onwards they marched to the exit and out into the Untitled. So thank you so much for listening to some excerpts from Tommy Turner's tremendous travels this morning. And if you'd like to read more from the book, you can borrow it from the City Bibliothèque. You can also buy it on all the Amazon channels as well. So good reading.